Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nanette Nokan. Thank you for joining us. Another new year, another opportunity to enhance our money management strategies. Many people come out of the holidays with a significant amount of debt from holiday shopping. So today, our guest once more allowing us to share with you some strategies on consumer debt management is Chad Riflin, who is the Education Chairman of the Credit Education Bureau here in Rochester. Thanks again for joining us, Chad. I really appreciate it. What's the shock that consumers are facing these days, right after the holidays?
Well, I think the shock is just that they realize the credit card bills that they have racked up and the balances that they've accumulated over the holidays. The American Retail Index did a study and found that the average household spent about $1,600 during the month of December on holiday expenses. So when compared to the average budget, it's really going to have a serious impact.
Sure, $1,600. Oh, that's interesting information. When working with a number of clients, the figure they usually have is between $1,500 to $2,000. So that's right around the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting to hear. So if people don't plan for it ahead of time, a big whopping $1,600.
Absolutely, and balances like those can take years to pay off when we're talking about credit card bills and the kinds of interest rates that people would be paying if it was credit card debt.
I see. So the sweater that someone got for Aunt Sally, for example, may have been purchased at a great deal for a holiday gift, but if they're paying consumer credit interest expense on that, the sweater can be more than the original price tag.
The price might double over the amount of time that individual has to pay that sweater. The average American spent about $1,150 on their credit cards throughout the holidays. And even if they were able to pay $50 a month, that would still take about 2 years to repay and over $200 in interest if we're assuming an average interest rate of 15%.
Oh my goodness. So really, by the time you pay off that credit card, another holiday comes along, and then you build it up.
A couple more holidays.
Right, that's right. And so it's never ending, and you're always a couple of years behind.
Sure, it can be a vicious cycle.
Right, and then for next thing you know, you might be paying an entire Christmas or holiday shopping budget for interest expense alone.
Absolutely.
Oh, that could be pretty staggering.
Not a position you want to be in. And as you said, the main thing is that individuals realize they need to prepare for those kinds of expenses. We usually look at our budgets and think of the typical monthly expenses, but you don't factor in the holiday expenses or your periodic expenses all the time, and that can really make a big impact if you don't.
Mm-hmm. You've got an excellent point, because many people think of it, let's say it's January and there's the typical bills are just gas and electric, food, gasoline, and so on. People tend to forget or not allocate dollars for those large expenses that might come up, and it's going to be a big surprise. And guess what? The holidays is not a surprise. It comes in the calendar every year, doesn't it?
That's right.
Even Grinch can steal that. So what to do now? I mean, the consumers have gotten these bills that they have to pay, average of $1,600. What are some of the strategies that people can help themselves now that they have received this bill?
Well, they're going to have to take a really close look at their budget and decide what are some of the things that they might be able to cut back on right now, any unnecessary expenses that they might be able to save so that they can make an additional payment to those credit card bills or to those expenses that they're still paying for. And the more that they can pay now, the better off they're going to be, because the longer that they pay, essentially the more they're going to pay in interest charges. And then also start preparing now for the upcoming holidays in 2003 and beyond, maybe with a club account at a particular bank or credit union, or at least some type of savings account like a money market account.
Sure. So in order for someone to pay off the $1,600 credit card bill from December, they really need to start paying about $150 a month roughly into the card, as well as start saving that much.
To make a real impact on that balance, you're going to have to pay at least triple or quadruple the minimum payment to really even feel like you're getting somewhere or paying it off before the next holiday season arrives. So what I would advise people to do, again, is sit down, list your expenses, list your income, and figure out how much you can devote towards paying down your debts.
That's an excellent idea. And of course, the other strategy is to say, well, should I be spending this much for holiday gift giving? Maybe it's something that people ought to review and visit if that is the appropriate amount allocated for gifts.
Sure, people really need to take a really serious look at what is their holiday spending pattern. Are they someone who's buying gifts to impress others and overspending that way? Or are they buying unnecessary gifts just because they really don't know what to get? And really plan ahead as to what you're going to buy and start early. Don't be a last-minute shopper and really comparison shop. We have the advantage of the internet nowadays to be able to do that, and other resources as well.
Sure, no, that's great. That's great. You're right. There's a lot of good deals there. There are some internet shops, sites where you could shop and they pay for the shipping or something like that. And some of the other sites, being out of state, you don't pay the taxes and whatnot. So there are other, there are ways to do some comparison shopping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I have approaches that I've seen with people is that they do an envelope system with their savings for Christmas. They set aside from their pocket money, whether it's $25 a week or whatever that amount they've designated, and put it in an envelope. And as they shop throughout the year, they take some of that money out of the envelope for gift giving. So then that way, if they find a good deal throughout the year, they're able to have the resources for it, and it's not a surprise at the very end.
Yeah, I think that would be a real beneficial way of doing it, because at least you are looking ahead and understanding what exactly you're facing. And maybe that individual would even have an envelope for each person that they're buying.
Oh, that's
so
a good
that way
point.
they would know exactly when they've spent their limit for each person that they're planning on shopping for.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because sometimes I think people find they want to be equal or equivalent in their gift giving among a certain group of people. And if they find something for someone that was $40 and their intention was $25, they might be tempted to spend $40 for all the other friends.
I think we've all been there, huh?
Yeah, that's right. So I think it's important to have a limit and stick by that. And it actually enhances creativity anyway, right? We tend to think more of a... And then the other pitfall I think that people find, and I don't know how, if this shows up at all in studies, is that some people shop for others, but along the way find gifts for themselves. So it could double the amount.
Very possible, very possible. Or you buy something for an individual and you like it as well, and so you're going to buy two instead of one.
Right.
So then your expenses are doubling right there.
Yeah, that's right. Now, let's say there's a credit card that has 15% interest on that. What are some of the things that consumers can do to effectively manage that? I mean, there are some offers in the mail with lower interest rates. What are some of the techniques consumers can work with that?
Well, the first thing that I like to tell individuals is if they've been a good customer with a particular credit card and they've made their payments on time, haven't missed any payments, they can always request to have their interest rate lowered with that particular company. And they've done studies and found that most credit card companies will do that if you've been a good customer, because they know that there's plenty of other companies out there that will be willing to get your business.
Sure.
So that would be the first step to try. Beyond that, what you would want to do is possibly transfer to a lower balance, where lower interest rate, transfer your balance to a lower interest rate and pay it at the lower interest rate. But you want to be careful as well of introductory periods and how much that interest rate is going to go up after that introductory period is over.
Sure, yeah, it could be like 0% for 3 months, and then you'd have to hustle and find a different card.
Sure, and that could jump up to 18%.
Sure, very much so. So people really need to pay attention to the limitation as far as any offers that are being made for attractive rates like that.
Absolutely, and they really need to read the fine print of those offers. That's where what I like to say, the nasty things are going to be regarding how much the interest rate is going to go up, or what the interest rate is going to be on other charges that you acquire on that credit card rather than the balances that you transfer.
Okay, that's great. What about there's solicitations that come about? One time I'd heard from a person who said, I'm going to use the cash advance from my credit card because there's an offer of 0%. And I said, oh, that sounds too good of a deal. I said, have you read the fine print? And she said, yeah, it's 0% until 3 or 4 months. But then it turned out that there was a transaction fee for writing that check. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Typically with a cash advance, there's always going to be that transaction fee. Sometimes it's a flat fee, sometimes it's a percentage of the amount that you are taking as a cash advance. And those cash advances can be obtained in two forms, either by going to an ATM, using your card to withdraw money, or through convenience checks that they send in the mail. And a lot of individuals get into trouble with those as well because they think that that's
free money.
Free money, exactly. But what they don't read on the back, that they're actually signing a contract for a loan, a very expensive loan. And most of the time, the interest rate on cash advances is more than what it will be for your actual credit card purchases, on top of the transaction fee that you're going to pay. and they're going to make you pay your other balances before you pay for the cash advance balance.
Well, that's interesting. So someone who sends in a check, let's say the payment is $300, it will be applied sooner to the consumer good purchase or the other charge before the
Right,
card.
the purchases that you made before, it will be applied to the cash advance that you took, which basically means the interest rate on the cash advance is going to accrue for longer. That higher interest rate that they're charging you.
Oh my goodness, that could be a terrible cycle to be in. So
Absolutely, because typically those interest rates are over 20%.
I see. And at the back of those convenience checks is the contract, like you mentioned, for most
Again,
of
the
them.
fine print.
Okay,
right?
fine print. Got to read that. Yeah.
Got to read it.
Yeah. I mean, interesting. You know, if the charge, for example, transaction fee is $40, is somebody's getting a cash advance of $400. Well, my goodness, that's a 10% charge. I mean, that's very expensive.
Yes.
So they really ought to pay attention.
Right. They're charging that much because you're getting the cash.
Right.
And it's a little bit more risky for them to be loaning you cash, essentially.
Sure. Well, that's the way for the banks and credit unions to make money. Obviously, that's an acceptable way for them, but you have to understand what you're getting into.
Right.
You know, they provide you the means to borrow money, but you just have to understand what the terms of the loan are.
Absolutely.
So education is very important.
That's key.
Yeah, it's a good thing you're around. So what are other strategies? You talked about maybe setting up an account at the beginning of the year and having that available for the holidays. Any other strategies that have worked for people in terms of, you know, planning for the holidays?
I would say start early again. I just want to reiterate that point.
Okay.
Last minute shopping is always going to be the cause of spending more because holiday sales typically aren't really holiday sales most of the time, and you aren't really going to have a plan as to what you're going to spend, and there might be a little bit more of a tendency to impulse purchase, to make impulse purchases when you shop.
Oh, sure.
Going back to setting up accounts to save up for the holidays, I would say the best way to do that is, if possible, have money automatically deducted from your paycheck every single pay period, which is transferred right into your account set up for these holiday expenses. And that way, you don't see that money, you don't really feel the impact of it being taken away from your checking account or whatever it might be. And that way, you're saving right off the top. You're paying yourself first.
That's great. No, and actually, that strategy applies, like you mentioned earlier, for big bills. And if you take a look at the first quarter of every year, you've got the holiday bills that are paid in January. You have in February property taxes, and not too far in front is the income tax that's due April 15th. So it's one thing after the other, and if people don't really plan for it, it can be a terrible problem
Sure,
to deal
it can be
with.
very devastating.
Right. Now, what about, you know, there are people, for example, who say, I like to get a huge tax refund when I file my income tax return because that's my holiday money. Now, I mean, that might be a good strategy to some extent if people cannot discipline themselves to save. But then there again, the charges are made in December and the money is not available till April.
That's right.
What are your thoughts on that kind of strategy?
Well, a lot of individuals feel that, as you said, they're not disciplined enough to save, so they want to get that money when they file their tax returns. And if that's the case, I think that that's appropriate. But what they also have to understand is that when they are doing that, essentially they are giving the government their money at a no-interest loan. Whereas if they were disciplined enough to save that money, they could be earning interest themselves, and as you said, withdraw that money in December when they really need to make those purchases for the holidays. So it could go either way. I obviously prefer to save that money, earn the interest, and then use it in December.
So as long as you understand what your strategy is and understand, you know, what the benefits are, and it works for you, because everybody has their own, you know, system of making things happen, but as long as the bottom line, you're financially ahead.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think that the thing is, you have to understand how you think and how you work with your money and make sure that it's working for you and not driving you into the ground, that it's putting you ahead, as you said before.
Right. Now, let's take it to one extreme and say you lost your job, went shopping for Christmas, got this big bill, lost the job, it's January, sky's falling. What kinds of things can the person do? You know, there's this bill that's to be paid and concerned about even making mortgage payments and things like that. What is a consumer to do when they're faced with that scenario?
Well, number one, they need to contact their creditors and let them know what the situation is, that they are unemployed. that they are looking for a job and that they currently cannot pay those bills, and see what types of an arrangement those creditors can make to defer their payments or maybe withhold their interest that they are charging them for a period of time while they're looking for work.
Mm-hmm.
If it's an extended period of time that they're going to be unemployed for, and those creditors are unwilling to work with that individual, then they might want to turn to an organization like Consumer Credit Counseling Services, where they can seek out some type of payment assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And what they will essentially do is set up payment plans with the individual's creditors. That individual will pay Consumer Credit Counseling Services, and they will distribute the funds for them. Beyond that, the last resort would obviously be bankruptcy.
Yeah.
But the first step is always to contact your creditors on your own.
Yeah, and many of them might be able to make some adjustments on the interest maybe or something like that.
Yeah, depending upon the creditor.
Yeah.
But it is worth a try.
Sure, absolutely. Is that the case too? Do you think it's worth a try for people to discuss this with their mortgage holders? I mean, is that something, or that's kind of tougher to work with?
They're definitely going to be a lot tougher to work with, but again, it doesn't hurt to try. Some of them do have programs where they will set you into a deferred payment plan if you are unemployed or if you face a serious illness that was unexpected.
So really, from the bank's perspective, they'd prefer that you continue the payments, but they'll work with you rather than you forfeiting the need or to pay off that debt, right?
Right.
I mean, bankruptcy is the last desire of a financial institution.
Exactly. For them to actually go through the proceedings of foreclosure or repossession, it's going to cost them some money. So they are going to be willing to work with you at first and try to work some type of arrangement out. Most reputable lenders will do that.
Right. You know, it's interesting in our discussion, if that were to happen, it really is a tight spot if people have not planned for cash reserves. And one of the things that, I always share with people is that you have to take a look at having cash reserves as 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses in case things like this happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's two things that will break an individual's budget. Number one is overspending. Number two is emergencies. And you have to prepare for both of those. To prepare for the first one, you develop a budget, a spending plan. To prepare for unexpected expenses or emergencies, you have to set up an emergency fund, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Very important. Life, unfortunately, doesn't just go in a straight line. It just is bumps up and down along the way. So, one of the things that there are some strategies that people can find money for the holidays. Like you mentioned, you alluded to adjusting your tax withholding so you don't get a huge tax refund at the end. Can you talk about some strategies? How do people actually mechanically do that? If they're going to end up with a tax refund that is quite substantial, how can they benefit from using that money?
Well, I like to advise individuals to always have a plan as to how they're going to spend windfall money or money that they're going to receive unexpectedly in one lump sum, and to decide what percentages are going to go to what expenses, because obviously the temptation is to use that money for a holiday or go out shopping again. And that's fine if you want to use some of that money for those things, because we all have our weak spots, but it's best to just plan ahead and maybe plan to set aside 10% for your shopping expenditures, 50% for savings, 50% for whatever it might be that you decide to hold that money for.
I think it's so important, though, to plan and to write it down. Sometimes I face people who have gotten inheritance and counted the money 3 or 4 times. We'll remodel the kitchen, we'll do this, we'll take a trip. Next thing you know, the inheritance had actually, instead of making it a nice gift to enhance the picture, it has now cost a lot of unnecessary expenses in that it brought up the desire to spend money. So let's say the inheritance was $10,000. Now there's 3 $10,000 goals that need to be met just because that $10,000 was gifted.
Right.
So I think it's very important to write it down and to make sure that you know how you want to allocate your dollars.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's amazing how that could work out. One of the other things that I had been recommending for clients is if there's a year where you have to bunch your deductions, to take a look at the things that you can donate in your house that you're no longer using, but can get some deductions if you donate to a nonprofit organization. Then you end up with a larger tax refund at the end, but it requires some advanced thinking, much like planning for saving,
Right, it all comes down to planning and being disciplined. That's the number one key to building a strong financial future, no matter what your income is, no matter what your expenses are.
Right. Now, let's talk about the kids who get the presents. When is the right time to educate the children with regard to what the presents really mean in terms of its financial implication?
I think as soon as they understand what money is, it's important to let them know how money is spent. And not necessarily to tell your children that you can't afford something, but to let them know that you're choosing to spend the money on something else that is more important to the family, or more important to the necessities of the family. And as you do that, you will actually be instilling the proper money management techniques and values about money into your children right from the start.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually a nice exercise for math problems, really, isn't it?
It could be, sure.
Yeah, I mean, if the family decides that each child gets a certain amount of money, they can, take a look at how it's spent. I know of someone who has, what they do is they give the Sunday inserts to the children, for the toy shops or whatever. And each of the children clip out the toys that they want with the price. And then they add it together, and then they have a certain limit to the amount of gifts. So if the toys that were added together amounted to something more than they had all agreed upon, then they have to exchange the picture. I thought it was a very cute strategy,
Yeah, that's a great strategy, and it is great to let your kids know exactly how much money is going to be spent on them for the holidays. I don't think that it's going to make them feel any less appreciative of the holidays or the gifts that they receive. If anything, it will just instill in them the fact that money is limited and it is something that has to be planned when it is spent.
Sure, absolutely. And it's a habit that is actually so useful as we get older, because it's a habit that we build throughout our lifetimes. I think it's very difficult for people to make a sudden transition from just spending wherever, whatever, and then as adults, it's tougher to get down to budgeting and planning. But if you start as a child with simple things like the gift planning and things like that, it might transfer into the other aspects.
Yeah, I think if it's already instilled in you that you plan on you plan your spending, how you're supposed to manage your money, then when you're older, it's just almost automatic, like breathing. But like you said, if you're an adult and you've always grown up with an atmosphere where money was just spent without any restraint and there was a lot of debt that was incurred through spending, it's going to be very difficult for you to change your mentality and thinking to have to restrain yourself and be disciplined with your finances.
But then if you don't, it's a
problem.
Yeah, a tough road ahead. Now, what about the issue with spouses or partners, in terms of gift giving? At times, one wants to make a gift and not know, not tell the other how much they've spent, but then it could be problematic with the surprises that come along. Any suggestions for those people in that kind of mind?
Well, I think that you do need to sit down with your spouse before the holidays and come to a decisive conclusion between the two of you as to what you're each going to spend on each other's gifts. And then do your best to be disciplined to stick to that. And be realistic. Don't give an unrealistic figure. We're only going to spend $20 on each other's gifts. It's most likely that's not going to happen. But really plan according to what you want to buy, according to what you each feel comfortable with, so that you can have something to look forward to.
Sure. That's true. You're right. It's very important to plan and don't be unrealistic. You're right. Yeah. For a special occasion, spouses sometimes at $20 might not be adequate. It's an amazing thing. What are some of the ways that people can get this information? I mean, we're talking about it, they're hearing, and they read articles, but is there a central location? I mean, you folks at the Credit Education Bureau, you provide some information, don't you?
We sure do. All the information and guidance and advice that we provide is completely free, and we just work to give individuals an unbiased opinion as to what would be the best direction for them to take. And we have a full library of resources and brochures and materials that can help them along the way. And they can obtain that just by calling our credit hotline, which is 256-6080.
Would you repeat the credit hotline again?
It's 256-6080.
Okay, so this service is free. They can call the hotline. Could they come to the office and access the library that you have?
What we'll do is send them some materials.
Okay.
If the advice and counsel that we can give them over the phone is not sufficient, then we will set up an appointment, bring those individuals in, sit them down, and counsel them one-on-one.
I see. What about internet access? Is that also a viable way to contact your organization?
We have a very nice website that's set up with downloadable brochures. You can contact us right online if you want to remain anonymous. and that's just at crediteducationbureau.com.
Okay, crediteducationbureau.com. Well, that's easy
right.
enough to remember.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, what about accessibility? Are the services only available to people who live in the county? I mean, help me out. Who can access the information that the Credit Education Bureau can provide?
We provide this information pretty much to anybody in Western New York State.
Okay. So anyone who wants to just access that, there's no fee, and it's now. How are you funded? Is this a United Way agency?
No, we are funded by the Credit Bureau of Rochester. We work as the parent company to the Credit Bureau.
Okay.
So all of our services are completely free. We work as a community service.
I see. So from the consumer perspective, there are no fees. However, there's funding that's received from other institutions
Right.
to help run the program. That's excellent. Now, you've been with them for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, on and off for about 7 years, 7 or 8 years.
That's great. Now, if people said, well, that's a great program, I want to take that to a certain group of people, how can they access your services?
They can just give us a call directly, and we will be more than happy to set up a presentation for the participants of their program, or high school students. Pretty much any group that will have us, we'd be more than happy to come out, set up a workshop, a presentation, provide all of those individuals with the materials that they need.
Oh, that's fantastic. And all of this is free?
Yes.
Okay, so it's really the desire to want to know more about managing credit, managing debt, and just being financially sound from that perspective.
Right, anything regarding personal finance.
I see. And it starts from a young age, grammar school, high school, adults,
Yep.
whatever groups.
The
Okay.
whole range.
That's great. So even associations that would like a speaker, they can invite you.
Absolutely.
That's great. What a wonderful resource to have that. You know, it's amazing because sometimes there's so many resources just in our backyard and people don't know what's available, and sometimes they feel like there's no solution and then might resort to something like bankruptcy. As severe as it is, you know, they might not know that there's some other choices that they could look at. And truly, to avoid that, like you've said, it's planning.
Right, and that's what we're here for, just to point people in the right direction.
Yeah.
Let them know what is the best option for them to take.
Right, that's right. Any other things that you'd like to mention to our consumers who are watching out there, looking at
I think we
managing
covered
credit?
a pretty good perspective.
Right, okay. So again, we want to plan and make sure that we are looking at all the fine print along the way instead of just signing those documents and convenience checks.
Yes, watch out for that fine print.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you very much, Chad Riflin. I really appreciate you being here. He's the education chairman of the Credit Education Bureau here in Rochester, New York. And if you'd like to contact, they're certainly in the phone book, but would you repeat the number again?
Sure. The number is 256-6080. That's our credit hotline.
Great. Or you could write to the crediteducationbureau.com. Again, thank you for joining us. My name is Nanette Naukan. Until next time.